Welcome friends, it's Ray. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's video, I'm making cards using the July Hero Arts monthly card kit. I am making 5 cards today, and they're all A7 5x7 cards. For my first card, I have used my stenciling material and cut out a square. I cut out a rectangle that's 2 3/4 by 4 3/4, and I've cut my stencil actually to 5.5 by 7.5. You can also use cardstock if you don't have this type of material. So I'm going to go ahead and place this on my white card panel that's cut to 5.5 by 8.5. So I just cut so I can place this anywhere. Because when I cut that out, this portion will be centered. So let me just tape that down with some purple tape. I'm using the ink pad from the kit and a small blending brush, and am bringing in some of that turquoise blue, and then the darker green, I should say, and then I will come in with the lightest green color and just blending that on my panel. Did get a little bit more of that dark green when I started it on the panel. I didn't tap off onto my mat, but later that won't matter so much because this is a very forgiving design. But just want to caution you that it's best to tap off so you don't get really dark color where you may not want it. After blending in my inks, I did bring in my spray bottle and spritz with water, and then used a dry paper towel to remove that water. And then before I stamp, I did off camera finish drying that panel with my heat tool. Placed my panel in my MISTI and placed my grid acetate sheet over top, and now I'm bringing in one of the silhouette floral images from the stamp set and pick that up with the door of my MISTI, and am now stamping with my Hero Arts intensified black ink. And I'm stamping several times to get a really good impression, and then we'll bring in other of those silhouette images and stamp those as well. And I'm trying to place them such that they only cross over the stems of each other versus over any of the floral pieces in each image. Placed a scrap piece of black cardstock in my MISTI and used some Versamark clear embossing ink to stamp my sentiment. Used my dry eraser or dry paintbrush to remove unwanted specks of that white embossing powder that I'm using, and then we'll heat this with my heat tool. I've trimmed down my white focal panel to 3 3/4 by 5 3/4, and am using liquid glue to mount it to my mat that measures 4 by 6. And this is Hero Hues Kiwi cardstock. And so now I'm going to trim down my sentiment. I also used a very small die, rectangular die, and just cut off the left and right ends on either side of the word bliss. And here I have used double-sided tape on the back of my mat and am partially releasing it, and then adding liquid glue just over those released areas of the tape, so that when I place it here on my card base, I have more room to adjust to make sure I've got my alignment right, and then I will release the rest of that release paper from the tape, and am using my tweezers here to place my sentiment directly over the bottom of those stems, bringing in my T-ruler to make sure I have this lined up just so. Bringing in some turquoisey glass embellishments from a prior Hero Arts kit, and using my Ranger multimedia matte glue and my embellishment wand to add 3 of those to my card front. And that finishes this card. Love the way it turned out. So I think this card and card number 4 may be my favorites. Let me know in the comments which cards you like best. Moving to card number 2. Before inking my stamp, I did use my anti-static powder tool to prep for heat embossing. Brought in my black VersaFine Onyx black ink and am stamping that several times to get a really good impression with this large silhouette floral. And then I will apply some clear embossing powder to my image and heat set this with my heat tool. I am bringing in masking paper and have die cut a large circle from my masking and placed that on my panel. And right here is where I realized I didn't turn my camera back on, but never fear. In card number 4, I will repeat and show you this entire process. But let's move on for now. I did use my Distress Oxide inks and Seedless Preserves, Wild Honey, and I think it's Carved Pumpkin to actually make my background. I bring in a stitched rectangle frame to die cut this panel. This frame measures 3 3/4 by 5 3/4. I'm using the Waffle Flower A7 Lacy Layers die set. I am holding this down with some reused purple tape, and then we'll run this through my die cutting machine. I am slowly and gently removing this tape so as not to tear my cardstock. I place my panel in my MISTI with my grid acetate sheet over top and placing my sentiment down, getting it aligned where I want it, and then removing that acetate sheet, lining my panel back up in my MISTI and bringing in my Hero Arts Intensified black ink and stamping that several times until I get the impression that I want. Bringing in the tiny bug from the stamp set that looks kind of like a beetle, and placing that in my MISTI, and we'll ink that up several times. I've placed it on top of one of the larger florals in the large floral image, and just will stamp that several times. I've cut a black mat, scalloped mat from that same waffle flower layering die set, and am going to go ahead and place my panel onto my mat using double-sided tape. After placing my matted panel onto my card base, I will then bring in a few sequins from a mix that came in a prior Hero Arts card kit, and that will finish off this card. Love the way it turned out. Nice evening sunset. For card number 3, I am ink smushing again, and have placed ink, the ink from the ink palette in the kit, onto my mat and spritzed it with water. Now just picking up that color with my cardstock and re-inking and re-spritzing, picking up color until I get the coverage that I'm looking for. And I love the way these 3 colors blend together. Beautiful color palettes. Colors mix so well, they don't create mud. Just beautiful. Next, I cut a piece of kiwi cardstock to 5 by 7 and pulled out a Creative Expressions Sublime embossing folder. I run this through my die cutting machine. Off camera, I did stamp my large floral image using VersaFine Onyx black ink, and heat embossed it with clear embossing powder. So this is opposite the emboss resist technique I used in card number 2. I trimmed my panel, my focal panel, to 4 1/8 by 6 1/4. I cut a mat from turquoise cardstock to 4 3/8 by 6 1/2. I fixed my focal panel to my turquoise mat with liquid glue, and then put that entire piece into my MISTI and lined up my sentiment, my butterfly, prepped for heat embossing, and then stamped that directly onto my matted piece with VersaFine Onyx black ink. I stamped that several times and then used clear embossing powder to emboss and heat set with my heat tool. I brought in my kiwi embossed panel and affixed foam tape to the back of my turquoise matted panel to elevate it, and so went ahead and placed that directly onto my kiwi panel, and then affixed double-sided tape to the back of that kiwi panel and placed that directly onto my card base. I'm bringing in a few shiny embellishments from my stash and placing those onto my card to finish it off. And for card number 4, I am going to ink blend on my canary colored cardstock. I'm going to reuse the circle mask that I used in card number 2 and actually show you the process this time. Yay! Alright, so I've inked on my Villainous Potion Distress Oxide ink and my Seedless Preserves, bringing in my wild honey. I added a little carved pumpkin, and then I'm going to go back over this, bringing my Villainous Potion back in, my Seedless Preserves, and just blending that all a little more. I removed my mask and blended in some more wild honey, just using what was on my brush without re-inking, just to soften that yellow. So yes, another sunset. And now I'm bringing in the green ink from the kit, the palette from the kit, and making grass. So I'm inking the bottom portion of my panel with grass. I trimmed my panel down to 4 by 6. I used the large Parkland's window fancy die to cut out my panel. I cut a piece of heavyweight acetate to just under the 4 by 6 and then lined it with double-sided tape. I am partially releasing the release paper from the tape on the acetate, and then we'll place this down behind my panel and then remove the remaining release paper. I use my paper trimmer to just trim off any overhanging acetate. My double-sided tape showed through a little bit on the bottom left side and the right side of my panel. So what I'm doing is piecing in just on that far left and the far right, just piecing in black pieces that I've die cut using the fancy die. So I'm just going to piece those in because my mat is going to be black. This is going to look pretty seamless. So I'm adding my double-sided foam tape to the back of my panel to form the window for my shaker, trimming it down where needed and making sure that I get all of the corners closed, or butt my tape up against all of the corners so that I can make sure my shaker elements have no exit. And then I use my anti-static powder inside of my window so that my shaker bits don't stick, or there's no static cling inside of my window. And I'm just bringing in sequins from my stash, mainly old Hero Arts card kits, and then I'm going to remove my tape and go ahead and add an acetate back to the back of this panel to contain my shaker bits. I did have to fish out a few sequins that got stuck to my double-sided tape, and then closed my acetate panel. And then I am adding some double-sided tape to the back of just the acetate portion of my panel. And right around here is where I remembered, oh, I don't have a sentiment on the front. So I'm going to place this in my MISTI and stamp my sentiment. I definitely want to use my Misty. I want to use my acetate grid sheet to get this lined up just right because I can't afford any mistakes at this point. Normally I would stamp my sentiment before I add my foam tape, before I put in my shaker bits, all of that. But got excited about a shaker. So I stamped my sentiment and also stamped the grasshopper image from the kit. Next, I partially released the paper from the foam tape and the double-sided sticky tape and added liquid glue to those exposed areas so that I have more room to get this aligned on my black mat before I commit it. Added double-sided tape to the back of my black mat, partially released that, added my liquid glue, and then affixed that to my 5x7 card base. I added some of the same sequins to the outside of the panel or top of the panel and just added some liquid adhesive to affix them. These are the ones that look like little petals. Love that. Love the way you can use the same initial technique and get a totally different look for your card. Yes, I'm thinking this one is, as I'm doing the voiceover, this one is my favorite. I love it. I can see this in a Halloween theme with a moon. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments which card you like best. For card number 5, my final card for this video, I am using an old ink palette that came in a prior kit. I add some ink to my palette, apply a little water, test it out off camera, decided didn't like it. So then what I did is I added more ink to the palette, brought in my paintbrush, wetted, and then swirled it around in my ink and tested that and like that better. So that's what I am going to do here. Add more ink, add more water, swirl it around with my paintbrush, and then bring in my cardstock. And yes, I love this much better. I just wanted something interesting on my paper. I didn't want a lot of straight lines. I wanted curvy lines. I wanted a lot of ink, and I wanted to mix the ink. And so this is what I came up with. So here, adding more ink, more swirls, and this is just purple. So I wanted to, purple's my favorite color. I wanted more purple in this. So adding purple to my panel. I love it when I get a chance to play and just experiment, and that's what I'm doing here. Just got a look in mind and playing, experimenting to see how I can get that look on my cardstock. And the palette that I used was water reactive. This grape isn't, although I mixed water with it just to thin out the color. Okay, so I've got the look that I want here, the grungy look, and I'm going to use a frame die to cut out my focal panel. I bring in the linen rubber stamp that was in the kit and ink that up with some intense black ink, and am just smooshing or placing that onto my panel, just corners of it. So I'm holding up one corner and then stamping with the other because I just want it in on pieces of my image, just in spots. So that's what I'm doing here. I've added my panel to a black mat that leaves about 1/8 of an inch border all around, and actually have laid out my dandelions that I cut from black cardstock using the dies in the kit, and using my precision tip glue to affix these down to my panel. And I did off camera stamp and heat emboss using white embossing powder my sentiments, and then trim those out. So those are not affixed yet. They are there just so that I can see how or where I want to arrange my dandelions. After placing my 3 large dandelions down, I do put my acrylic block over top to apply pressure so that those adhere really well to my card panel. And then I will work on the rest of my panel. I am spreading out my little dandelion wispy pieces. I think those are seeds now that I think about it. I am spreading those out, spreading out my sentiment, arranging that, and then I will go ahead, pop my sentiment up on foam tape, affix my dandelion seedlings to my card panel. So after affixing all of my seedlings, I used my acrylic block again, then turned this over and snipped off the edges of my large dandelions, and then will apply this black mat to a purple mat. I use the same method of applying or affixing my matted panel to my purple panel that I've used earlier in the video. So same method. And here I am bringing in my sentiments that are popped up on foam tape, and we'll go ahead and affix those to my panel. And then repeated the process of applying my double-sided tape and my liquid adhesive, and then affixed my panel directly to my card base. Now I am bringing in my sequins from my stash and applying some of those same turquoise sequins that I applied on an earlier card in this video. Love the way this turned out. Now let's take a look back at all of the cards I made using the kit. I had so much fun playing with this kit today. Hope you liked the video. As always, thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, good day, friends.